So thank you very much. It's very exciting here, and I'm usually the odd one out. I am today. I'm used to that because I'm a pediatrician scientist, and I represent academia, and I represent our city, if you would like to say. And you may wonder, well, Leipzig, where the hell is that? It's in the middle of Europe. It's in the middle of Germany, and we are not only a city of arts and science. You can also see that Leipzig is in the formerly East Germany, and it's not a city of arts and science, it's also the city of the peaceful revolution. Actually, Leipzig is the city where it all started. And this also, that's why I'm showing it, represents the mindset of the people, going from challenges to opportunity. And right now we are very well and very eager to set it up for obesity and metabolism. And it's like, talking to the choir. I don't need to emphasize what the prevalent problem obesity is, and it's actually even to grow. So these are predictions for the year 2035 that there will be more than every second inhabitant in the US will have been living with obesity, a quarter of the world, and it will cost trillions of dollars with regard to care for these patients, but also with the loss for the economics. But obesity is also not a cosmetic problem. I'm not sure whether you have seen the movie The Whale. If not, go watch it, because it nicely reflects obesity from a patient's view, and all the inputs that come with it and that could drive obesity. But it's also not only a movie topic. Why I am here, we are talking about patients. This is a patient that my colleague from adult endocrinology had, and he actually died age 29, and he said to Matthias Bleuer, go and tell the world my story. And actually, there are even younger patients, like this is a patient that we had a few years ago, and you may say, well, these are extreme cases, and you're right, but these are not the only cases, and we're getting more and more. And obesity is, in the end, a fatal disease. There are studies showing that compared to normal weight people, if you have severe obesity, there's a decreasing life expectancy by 12 years. And if it starts early, the obesity, there was another study showing that if you had to have obesity as a child, if you were in the highest quartile of these people, 10% will have died by the age of 40. So it's really a severe disease we need to take care of. I know that you are aware of it. But what are these patients in the end are dying of? It's of course the complications. There have been a lot of the discussions on the complications in the previous panel. And this is what we usually hear about the adults. Actually, there are more than 200 complications related to obesity, and it affects every organ system of the body, every medical specialty. And as said before, this is usually what you diagnose in the adult patient. But again, this is something that starts much earlier and also already in children. Of course, they do not die of myocardial infarction yet, but we do see the first signs of these complications already in children. They have a more than 5-fold increased risk to develop prediabetes or diabetes. More than 1/3 of them have hypertensive blood pressures, and there's a high cardiovascular risk burden. And also, we must not forget we are caring about patients, we are caring about people, and also all the stigma and psychosocial burden that comes with it. There's another interesting study showing that the quality of life, the health-related quality of life of a patient, of an adolescent with obesity, equals that of a patient with cancer. And being a pediatrician myself, a pediatrician scientist, this is something that is very important to me. Even though we know it starts early, children do not adequately, at least not adequately, benefit from the scientific and the clinical advance. And another notion that we really believe in is that knowing that obesity is a complex disease, it requires a complex approach. So I've been talking about obesity prevalence in children and that it's growing. You can also ask a very simple question like, when does obesity manifest? So this is a question where everybody has an opinion on it, but to answer it, you need data, you need good data. And this is what we have in Leipzig. We looked in more than 50,000 children and looked into is there something like a vulnerable age when obesity develops? And actually, it starts very early in childhood. It's the preschool age between 3 and 6 years of life, which is obviously a critical age for the manifestation of obesity. But then, once it has developed, is it just innocent puppy fat and they will grow out? No, they will not. If we look into what is the risk if you have overweight or obesity as a child, that you will have overweight or obesity as an adult. And in the first year of life, the chances are 50-50. But already by 3 years of age, if you have overweight or obesity, chances are more than 90% that you will have obesity as an adolescent and then as an adult. So clearly we need to change those trajectories. And if we want to change those trajectories, we need to look into the critical vulnerable windows, which is then, of course, early in life. I mean, it has been addressed in the both previous rounds. But then also we need to consider that there are lifelong complications. So it's really tackling metabolic disease lifelong. And this is our vision that we have in Leipzig, so that we really want to understand the mechanism of modern diseases like obesity in a way so that we can design and also translate new therapies to humans and to improve the lives of the people living with the obesity and its complications. And how do we approach this in a holistic way? Well, first, of course, we need to know what drives obesity. Then, when is the point of no return when the complications develop? Particularly, we are, for example, speaking of diabetes. And then we need to know how can we detect those patients, those people at highest risk for develop early and severe forms of obesity and the complications. And we need to understand the mechanism to overcome the treatment and prevention gap. And for that, I believe we need to closely link the experimental mechanistic science with the clinical epidemiological science and to have a closer connection also between industry and research. Now, what drives obesity? Again, such a thing where everybody has an opinion, right? Many people, maybe not in this audience, will say, well, it's just about eating and exercising, we know that. Other people may think, well, it's about the adipose tissue, and the third one will say, well, it's all genetic, it's predisposition, we can't do anything about it. But in the end, of course, it's a whole picture. We need to acknowledge that we do live in an obesogenic environment. It's not all our decision. And then, of course, it's the biology of us. We are built the way that we will always defend our body weight. No matter how high it is, we will always defend our body weight. And the brain is integrating this environment and the biology. And what do I mean with better understanding the mechanisms and looking deeper into these associations? So what we, for example, do is look into drivers of obesity, knowing from risk factors that the number one risk factor, for example, in children to have obesity is if the parents have obesity. Now, that can be genetics, it can be a shared environment, or it can be both. And actually, if we looked into when the mom has obesity, what is the risk of the kid developing obesity? This, of course, is already increased, but then if you, in addition, take into account lifestyle factors like screen time, this potentiates the risk. And of course, environment does play a role. We have all been exposed to an environmental experiment the COVID pandemic that had a severe impact on our lifestyle, and that came with a high increase in the prevalence of children and adults having significant weight gain. Also, the health behavior is not only something that's energy in, energy out, it also has an effect on our biology, for example, on the adipose tissue. And then there are many other environmental factors, just to name a few, like pollutants that can have an effect on the biology of adipose tissue. Now, next thing, of course, you may think, well, in the end, it is the predisposition. Yes, of course, it is predisposition. Some people, if they think of a genetic component of obesity, they think of monogenic disease. And it's true, there's more and more monogenic traits are being discovered. And we are also working on that. And if we understand the mechanisms, what are disrupted, then we can learn about human pathophysiology. But in the end, these are rare diseases. The most genes that are affected are actually, it's a polygenic predisposition that exposes us to obesity. And for many of these genes, we don't understand actually the mechanisms. For monogenic obesity, it's quite clear, it's all these genes are implicated in the central regulatory mechanisms. That's not true for the polygenic predisposition. And we've been working also on the functional genetics to find what is the mechanism, what is the link between the gene, the variant, and the physiology. And also we need to talk about the epigenetic mechanisms that link the environment with the biology. So we clearly have a medical problem. Obesity and the complication costs life, costs quality of life, and it costs money, of course. Treatments, so far that we have regularly failed, so we do need new approaches and ideas to tackle that. Now, the ideal thing, of course, if we want to address the pandemic of obesity, is that we shift this distribution curve of BMI to the left. So the whole population, being more healthy. But what would it take? Of course, therefore, we would need to address our entire obesogenic environment, all the higher ecosystems. So this is something that is very hard to achieve, maybe not even. But what is more interesting for this audience here is that we can also work on the other side on these patient-centered, individual-centered therapies. And there is the new hope that we have from pharmacotherapy. And for this, we now have for the first time a toolbox where we really can help the patients. And this is to thank those guys, Matthias Chirp and Richard DiMarchi, who were really spearheading the field too. So what we had before was the multimodal lifestyle intervention, which still is the backbone of every obesity treatment. You cannot just give a drug and say, well, everyone will be fine. We always need the multimodal treatment. Pharmacotherapy until 5 years ago, was not really successful. Then you had bariatric surgery. Well, that did do an effect with weight loss of about 30%. And then with the new pharmacotreatments, there was really new hope that we were achieving weight loss effects that were kind of bridging the gap between bariatric surgery. So now, are we done? I mean, for the first time, it's really exciting for us as physicians. We do have something effective and so far safe treatment that we can offer patients living with obesity. So are we done? I think we are not, because there's still issues that need to be solved. Like, for example, a treatment, it's a treatment, it's not a cure. And so far the treatment needs to be lifelong. That's something that hasn't been touched upon today. So if we start with 20, today it's a lifelong treatment. There's plateauing of the treatment response. We need to be able to predict the treatment response. There are still side effects. And also, it needs to be available to the patients who need it. That includes patient group, particularly the children. And we need to think about costs and reimbursement. And there's still work in the reimbursement too. Now, this is what we in Leipzig also have been driven for years. Sustainable principles of life and health is one of the major strategic fields of the University of Leipzig and also of the medical faculty of Leipzig. And we have been instituting the Leipzig Center of Metabolism together with many other extra university, very well-renowned academic institution. And this has been a strategic development been going on for more than 20 years, starting with collaborative initiatives and also infrastructural projects, and is also within the framework of the Saxony, the Free State of Saxony research ecosystems. We have many institutes, and there's also a funding program along the entire innovation chain. So why Leipzig? Why are we caring for metabolic disease? I told you that. Why this Leipzig Center of Metabolism? We are really dedicated to patient-oriented research. Leipzig is the biggest obesity, clinical and research obesity treatment center in Germany. And we have a lot of disciplines. They are all carrying with the same goal, including the pediatric obesity research. Another very advantage is that we have unique cohorts on patient cohorts, on biobank, like with adipose tissue. We have a research environment, including possibilities for phase 1b and phase 2 clinical trials. We have a metabolic chamber for humans, not only for mice. And as I said, there's the mindset of the scientist with the spirit to drive the change. So what are we working on? We have been working on obesity mechanisms like Matthias Blüher, clinical trials in cardiometabolism that are headed in the Leipzig Heart Center as well as in the university. Svante Pääbo won the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine 2 years ago. We are looking into topics like sex and gender, developing molecular signaling on drug response, and of course, we are also caring for the children. And the question we would like to address is, in what way are modern humans inherently at risk for in these modern environments? How does early life programming contribute to it? Which are the factors that we need to address to reverse these trajectories? How do we deal with the complications, how we address them, and how can we do individual prediction of treatment response? And for that, as I said, we need to interlink the clinical cohorts and science that we have with the organ health concept, with the adipose tissue, with the liver, with the heart, and apply those up-to-date technologies. And just to give you maybe two examples, as we are talking about precision medicine, I mean, we are always talking about patients with obesity, patients with renal failure, whatsoever. And if you think these are all patients, each dot is a patient, they are all individuals. They are not the same. They are not like one crowd with the disease. And for example, with the example of statin intolerance, there are people who may have a statin intolerance, a high-risk trajectory, and a poor response. And we need to dissect these subphenotypes within the heterogeneity of a patient population. And the same for obesity. Not all the people with obesity will develop the metabolic disease and the complications. Again, if you look into the association of the BMI with any parameter of metabolic health, of course, there's a clear association, but then all these dots are patients. You would expect that a patient with a high BMI is metabolically unhealthy, but a patient with the same BMI can be pretty well off so far. And we need to see what is the difference between those patients. It can be in the adipose tissue, what we are working on in Leipzig, and then if you dissect it and look into molecular signatures in adipose tissue that differentiate those clinical and biological phenotypes, then you can actually extract those. Also, when looking at human viability, it gives you the opportunity to find completely new discoveries. Like we had a patient in our clinic with severe obesity, insulin resistance, that phenocopied the phenotype of a mouse model of obesity. And in the end, we could identify the genetic cause of the obesity in this girl. We could dissect the pathophysiology and also the mechanism why this phenotype was driven. And this has several implications. The one is that we need to revise our diagnostic algorithms to detect those patients. Another one is that we can improve the mechanistic understanding of the human physiology. And of course, we do want to develop new treatment options. Also, thinking on treatment options, maybe we should rethink also the criteria for prediction. If you take a very simple parameter like blood glucose, there's the same cutoff for all of us, as we sit here for our children, for our parents, for everybody. But is that really the case? It would require that it's stable along the lifetime, but as you can see, it's not. So wouldn't it be better that we have age-related cutoffs? A very simple example. And so we developed this kind of age-related cutoffs for metabolic parameters, and they are much better in the prediction of future dysglycemia than the classical one that have been there for decades. And then, of course, if we do that, then of course, if we do have a better risk prediction, we should do something about it. You have a patient at high risk, you need to treat these patients, meaning that we need the clinical trials and also at the clinical vulnerable windows to help to reverse those trajectories, and even starting in children. So to summarize that, the challenge is there's a lot of risk factors leading to obesity working based on a genetic predisposition. And we need to predict this susceptibility and understand the heterogeneity and the mechanisms behind for obesity, as well as all the complications. And we need to identify modifiable targets also within a high-risk prediction that protect those high-risk patients from obesity or from disease. We need to work at the correct windows of opportunity, and finally, that we are able to develop precise prevention and treatment strategies to overcome this treatment gap. And finally, resolve the questions: how do we change the trajectories? How do we detect patient subphenotypes of high risk that we can finally apply this precision and prevention approach in clinical practice? So that in the end, we are all working together to overcome the research and the treatment gap for people living with obesity. And there are many issues that have been already discussed in the previous podium discussions. And I also would like to vote for that we need a closer connection between the patient-centered research and also, of course, the applications and drug development that you're working on. And if I would have a wish, what I would like to achieve in my academic career, that there's also dedicated research bridging the gap for children living with obesity and other modern diseases, like institutionalized research, etc. And with that, I would like to thank you very much, and I'm very open to questions.